Imagine this: the United States, the world's corn powerhouse, ships out massive bulk carriers loaded with golden grain, only to find that some of its biggest former buyers have quietly vanished from the order books. No headlines screaming trade war, no dramatic midnight bans, just an eerie silence from markets like China, once a top customer, now barely a blip on the radar. And in the background, Canada, a country more famous for its wheat and oats than corn, is quietly playing a very different game. Its harvest is smaller, sure, but in certain premium segments, it's punching far above its weight. In Tokyo and Seoul, buyers are writing checks not just for corn, but for Canadian certified identity-preserved corn that promises consistent quality and, in some cases, non-GMO guarantees. While the US moves mountains of grain, Canada moves margins, and those margins are landing multi-million-dollar, sometimes billion-dollar contracts when you roll them into its broader grain portfolio. The twist? US exports are actually near record highs this season, even without China, but the headlines and political talking points are ripe for spin. In the corridors of Washington, lawmakers are talking about rejections and threats to farmers, as if history's 2013 Syngenta Mir 162 debacle could happen again. In reality, the drama isn't about widespread cargo refusals at all. It's about shifting market share, evolving trade rules under USMCA, and who controls the most lucrative niches of the corn trade. So, is America really facing a rejection crisis? Or is this another case of a loud political storm over a market that's quietly adapting and diversifying? And just how close is Canada to rewriting its role in the North American corn story? Let's break it down. For decades, the US has been the undisputed giant in the global corn market, producing over 350 million metric tons annually, with exports feeding livestock, fueling ethanol plants, and filling supermarket shelves worldwide. Its dominance was so overwhelming that when China entered the market in the early 2010s, US farmers saw an unprecedented surge in demand. In 2020-21, China accounted for nearly a third of all US corn exports, a trade windfall worth billions. But that era has shifted sharply. As of the 2024-25 marketing year, China has all but disappeared from US corn purchase lists, accounting for close to 0% of total exports. Instead, the heavy lifting is being done by countries like Mexico, Colombia, Japan, South Korea, and even niche buyers in the European Union. This change didn't happen in a vacuum. One flashpoint is Mexico's policy on genetically modified corn. In late 2024, a USMCA dispute panel ruled that Mexico's restrictions on GM corn imports for food use violated the trade agreement. Mexico responded by amending its constitution in February 2025 to ban GM corn cultivation domestically while still allowing imports for animal feed, a political compromise that sidestepped an all-out trade war but left tensions simmering. Meanwhile, fears of rejections resurface every time there's a mention of stricter food safety standards. Analysts remember vividly the 2013 to 2014 Syngenta MIR 162 incident when China turned away multiple US corn cargoes due to an unapproved GMO trait, causing billions in losses and sparking lawsuits. Those memories make for potent political soundbites, even if today's data paints a calmer picture, with 97% of tested US corn shipments meeting the strictest FDA fumonisin standards. And then there's Canada. Traditionally a corn importer to feed its livestock and ethanol sector, Canada has in recent years built up its own export footprint, especially in identity-preserved premium corn. These shipments, often bound for Japan and other high-spec markets, aren't about volume supremacy. They're about commanding a higher price per ton. This is the backdrop: shifting buyers, trade rule skirmishes, quality control politics, and a neighbor quietly finding profit in the cracks of a market long dominated by the United States. Let's strip away the political noise and look at the numbers. As of July 3rd, 2025, U.S. corn export commitments, that's sales booked plus physical shipments, hit 2.731 billion bushels. That's not just strong, it's nearly on par with the all-time record of 2020-21. And here's the kicker, this has been achieved without China. The export leaderboard now reads Mexico, Colombia, Japan, South Korea, and the European Union as the top destinations. USDA's official projection for the 2024/25 marketing year puts U.S. corn exports at 2.65 to 2.75 billion bushels, making this one of the largest export years in history. That performance has been supported by competitive pricing relative to Brazil, as well as strategic timing. U.S. corn was ready to ship when South American supply temporarily tightened earlier in the year. From a quality standpoint, the U.S. Grains Council's latest export cargo quality report shows 97.2% of samples tested below the strictest FDA fumonisin threshold of 5.0 parts per million. In other words, the kind of widespread rejection scenario seen during the MIR 162 crisis a decade ago simply isn't happening in 2025. On the Canadian side, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, AAFC, reported 15.3 million metric tons of corn production in 2024, with yields hitting record highs even as planted area slipped slightly. As of March 31st, 2025, Canada's corn stocks sat at 7.2 million tons, down 13% year-on-year, reflecting a combination of higher domestic use and increased exports. Those exports are projected at 2.7 million tons for 2024-25, worth about 700 million Canadian dollars. Impressive, but still far from the billion-dollar mark for corn alone. However, when you fold in the rest of Canada's grain portfolio, total cereal exports easily exceed 11 billion US dollars annually. Within that, identity-preserved corn, certified under the Canadian Grain Commission's CIPRS program, is carving out a profitable niche in markets that prize traceability and non-GMO status, particularly in Japan. Layer onto this the Mexico-USMCA tension, Japan's recent moves to expand U.S. corn imports, and the ever-present possibility of tariff changes under shifting geopolitical winds, and you get a market that's not in freefall, but in rebalancing. The story of this year's corn trade isn't one of simple winners and losers on a scoreboard. It's a shifting drama where strategies, not just sheer volume, decide who comes out ahead. For U.S. exporters, the absence of China could have been a devastating blow. Just a few years ago, Beijing was buying almost a third of all American corn that left port. Now that number is effectively zero, and yet the U.S. hasn't stumbled. Instead, it has leaned into relationships with Mexico, Colombia, Japan, and South Korea, moving record volumes without the once dominant Chinese demand. Japan's move is particularly telling, in part a diplomatic nod to Washington, in part a calculated choice for reliable supply. The result? America has proved that its reach extends far beyond the whims of a single buyer. Canada's win is quieter but no less significant. Without the capacity to challenge U.S. dominance in raw tonnage, it has doubled down on quality. Its identity-preserved and non-GMO corn has become a sought-after product in Japan, where consumers want assurance of origin and purity. Here, Canada is selling trust as much as grain, and that trust commands a premium. With every certified shipment under the Canadian Grain Commission's CIPRS program, Canada reinforces its image as a dependable supplier for the most demanding markets. But every gain has a counterpoint. China, by stepping back from U.S. corn, has had to rely more heavily on Brazil and Ukraine, suppliers that have faced weather setbacks and logistical bottlenecks. This hasn't collapsed China's feed industry, but it has kept costs higher than they might have been with U.S. cargoes in the mix. Brazil, for its part, has seen its usual mid-year surge in exports blunted. Problems in shipping and climate conditions opened a window that the U.S. was more than happy to step through, seizing sales that might otherwise have been Brazil's. The ones truly squeezed, are the mid-tier exporters, nations that can't undercut US prices or match Canada's quality credentials. In a market where buyers can get massive volumes at competitive rates from the US, or pay a little more for certified Canadian grain, the middle ground is shrinking fast. This isn't just a tale of who shipped more or less corn. It's a realignment. Where the US has proven its market resilience, Canada has carved out a profitable niche, and others are left to fight over the narrowing spaces in between. Looking ahead, the corn market's next chapter will be written in the language of competition and adaptability. On paper, the United States appears unstoppable. Export commitments hovering at near-record highs, an increasingly diversified buyer base, and a proven ability to fill demand when rivals stumble. But the resilience on display in 2024/25 doesn't guarantee smooth sailing into 2025/26. Brazil's second crop corn will return in force if weather patterns normalize, and Ukraine's Black Sea exports, despite ongoing risks, are slowly finding stable shipping lanes. Both will push aggressively into markets that the US has just reclaimed. Canada's path forward is equally nuanced. Its volumes may plateau or even slip as global supply expands, but that won't erase the advantages of its premium positioning. If anything, niche markets for non-GMO and identity-preserved corn could grow, especially in Asia, as food safety and traceability take on even more importance. The challenge for Canada will be scaling this advantage without eroding its exclusivity. Because the moment premium becomes common, the price premium disappears. The wildcards are policy and geopolitics. The US-Mexico dispute over genetically modified corn isn't fully resolved. A single policy shift in Mexico City could alter the balance for millions of tons of trade. Tariff talks with Japan and South Korea may open or close doors in an instant, depending on the political climate. And while China's retreat from US corn looks firm for now, its feed industry is notoriously pragmatic. If prices turn, Beijing could quietly re-enter the market, upending the current alignment. For now, the North American corn trade is a story of two strategies: the US wielding scale and speed, Canada leveraging trust and quality. Both are winning in their own lanes, but neither can afford to coast. The global grain market has a way of punishing complacency. If you're watching this as a farmer, trader, or policymaker, the takeaway is simple. Resilience isn't about holding on to old markets. It's about being ready to pivot when the ground shifts under your feet. And in this business, the ground is always shifting. So keep your eyes on the ships leaving US Gulf ports and the freighters loaded in Ontario. The next big move might not be about who grows the most corn, but about who plays the smartest game when the rules change. Like what you've heard? Hit the like button, share this with anyone following the ag markets, and subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown of global trade's shifting tides.